Today, of course, what we do have, and I very much warmly welcome this, is the publication of the international comparator study from the government. And I pay tribute to the Home Office Minister in his place for the leadership he's shown in that whole process. Today does see that publication of what was, I think, a very long-awaited international comparators report, commissioned on the recommendation of the Home Affairs Select Committee, and is a considered review of the different approaches to drug policy pursued around the world. And the review indicates, I think, that introducing alternatives to prohibition would not, contrary to some claims, boost drug use, and it could save millions of pounds if users were treated for addiction rather than being jailed. It seems
the Adam Smith Institute is a neoliberal think tank working to promote free market ideas through research, publishing, media commentary and educational programmes. Part of the work that the organisation commits to is advocating for drug policy reform in the UK. I spoke to Daniel Pryor, Head of Programmes at the Adam Smith Institute, who told me his views on our current drug policy in the UK.
I think it's a total failure and it needs a radical overhaul, and it has done for decades. And it's a shame from our perspective as a free market think tank that unfortunately most of the people who are pushing for the sort of drug reform that we would advocate tend to be on the political left. It's great that they're doing that, but we're trying to do something similar on the centre-right of politics as well. I think it's been a failure in just about every way you can count, whether it's creating more harm for users through a completely unregulated supply or increasing violent crime, which is becoming especially a huge problem in London at the moment. Most of it is related to drugs. So I think ultimately we need to legalise and regulate all drugs, starting with cannabis. That's something we're working on at the moment. And obviously different drugs should be legalised and regulated in different ways. So the kind of same, we wouldn't have the same system for accessing cannabis as we would for things like amphetamines or heroin, for example, which would be better suited to the sort of medical environment that DCRs provide.
The Adam Smith Institute focuses on legalisation as a primary force in UK drug policy reform. Daniel believes that decriminalising drugs alone won't work, whereas legalisation would put street dealers out of business. Daniel told me about the changes he would make to our current drug policy in the UK.
So there's a couple of things. I think that the broader question of legalisation, whilst that's important, it's almost as important how we would actually legalise and regulate. So if I was able to flick a switch tomorrow and legalise cannabis, for example, I'd be very concerned with how exactly we manage that regulated system. It's currently something that we're working on, a research report on how the UK should treat a legal and regulated cannabis market. So that's the kind of, the questions about regulation are extremely important as well. For example, if you put a ridiculously high tax on legal cannabis, then you're going to drive users back onto the black market and hobble the aims of legalisation in the first place. That's just a kind of one example. More broadly speaking, I think that there's also issues to do with the Psychoactive Substances Act and the way that has actually increased, I think, drug-related harms from novel psychoactive substances, and it's also hampered a lot of medical research into the potential benefits of various new substances as well. And more broadly, the kind of medical angle on drugs research and how our current drug laws are harming the ability of scientists to come up with novel and potentially extremely effective medicines for things like PTSD or depression. That's another thing I think it's important to focus on changing.
While it is unknown when we might see a reform of the UK drug policy, organisations will continue to campaign and push for their preferred drug laws.
I think that the shared aim of an awful lot of drug policy campaigners, regardless of what field or background they're coming from, is a royal commission on drug policy more generally. Specifically cannabis is the one that's often a focal point for campaigning. I think that such a royal commission would almost certainly find evidence in favour of changing our approach to drugs more broadly. One of my concerns with the current drug policy campaigning that we have is that it seems a lot of people and a lot of organisations are looking towards decriminalisation rather than legalisation. Now, I think that would be an improvement on the current situation we have, but I think it's important to redirect efforts towards legalisation specifically, because ultimately decriminalising possession of drugs does nothing to tackle the issues related to illegal and unregulated supply, which are arguably